So we now both have all the runes. So let's go over all the spells. You've seen Deflection quite a bit. It's a basic protection spell that raises your armor level to 25 if it's lower than that. It doesn't do anything if it's higher though. Shield is its big brother, and you can stack it with Deflection for a total of 65%. It's about as good as Mythical Plate Mail. Shadow form, and it's much more difficult to cast Big Brother Gaseous form. Add to your stealth quite a bit. They make you very hard to see, even from the front. They're very mana intensive, at least Gaseous form is. Once he does detect you, though, he won't lose track of you, even if you move a good distance away. I'm buffing up my magic stat because this spell is very hard to cast. Invulnerability is pretty much what it sounds like. Complete immunity to all damage sources. It's not quite as good as my favorite, which is Death Ward. Death Ward only costs 10 mana, very easy to cast, and while it's active you cannot die. If your HP reaches 0, you start taking mana damage. But even if your mana reaches 0, you won't die, as long as the spell is still active. Giant Strength, Silence, Haste, Wolf Speed, and Mantra are just basic buffs to your primary attributes. Most of them raise them by about 10. I think Haste does speed by 15. Mana regeneration and regeneration just increase your recovery rate for those stats. They aren't very powerful though. Enhanced Vision we've seen quite a bit. Owl Sight is just the more powerful, expensive version of it. Featherfall reduces your fall rate and negates all falling damage. This is my unbuffed jump height. There's a spell called Leap, which is just a one-shot, slightly higher jump. It's not usually worth it. Fly's expensive and hard to cast, but it's probably the best mobility spell in the game. Blink's pretty close though. You can use it to skip all sorts of trap triggers and other goofy stuff. It interacts strangely with heights though. Wizard Lock and Force Door are just the wizard varieties of the knock spell that Bacter uses all the time. Mages get identified too, although they need their final rune to cast it, so they don't get to use it till pretty late in the game. Magic Map you've seen pretty constantly. I usually wear it as a ring to save me the effort of having to cast it. You have to explore to fill in your map, but once it's filled in, you know it for good. There's a bigger spell called Mystic Map, which is very difficult to cast. It takes pretty much my entire mana pool at this rate. If you do manage to cast it though, it gives you your map completely filled in, which is pretty good for finding secrets. Poison Touch, Shocking Grasp, Touch of Acid, and Spirit Blade. Just add elemental buffs to your melee attacks. Spirit Blade adds piercing damage, which so far we've only seen from the Mounted Knights of Andrew. Seems to be just like physical damage that ignores armor, although I'm not really sure. It's really hard to cast too, probably not worth it. Altogether, these guy goes down in 3 hits when I buff them all up. Here's how long it takes if I don't have any buffs. As you can see, they don't really add much damage. Their main use is getting around immunities. Magic Dart is the basic long-range attack spell. It does little damage, costs almost nothing, doesn't home. It's physical elemental. Magic Missile is homing, but otherwise it's just like Magic Dart. I think it's a little more expensive though. Still only 2 mana per cast. Poison Arrow is a great spell. Poison's probably the most powerful element in the game unless you're fighting something immune to it. Cloud of Acid's pretty powerful and not too expensive, but you gotta watch out for splash damage. You can blow up your own items. Elemental Acid is just the homing variety of Cloud of Acid. It's pretty powerful. Kinda hard to cast though. Probably better to use wands. That's actually true for most attack spells. Fireball we've seen plenty of times, as well as its homing variety, Elemental Fire. Fire Blast is really hard to cast, but the splash damage is enormous. See how that guy got hit when it hit way down on the ground? Lightning Bolt is pretty much just like the acid spells, but lightning's a really good element. Almost nothing resists it. Lots of damage too. Death Cloud is probably the most powerful attack spell in the game if you can afford to wait for it to arrive. It does tons of damage of several different kinds. Poisons people a lot too. Repulse and Attract we've seen several times. They're mainly used for pushing enemies off ledges or pulling ranged enemies down to melee. Disorient I haven't used much because it's really hard to use with 2 players in a level. It randomly rotates an enemy, which is really kind of useless. Although if you can luckily get him to spin away from you, he does forget you're there, which is a little confusing. Angry Word is even harder to use in multiplayer. It seems to have a very small chance of resetting your enemy's targets to make them try to attack other enemies. The problem is, if he's already attacking other enemies and you hit him with Angry Word again, he'll just aggro on you, so you have to be real patient and careful. This is my unbuffed running speed, which I'm using so I can show off slow. This is the only stat debuff that wizards get access to. It's not really very good. Usually you don't want to slow enemies down, you just want to kill them. Dispel Magic is totally useless except in PvP. All it does is remove buffs. Splash damage can remove your own buffs though.